The dusty highways of rural America have witnessed countless stories of heartbreak and hope, but few as powerful as what unfolded on a forgotten stretch of road in Wyoming. When family turns their back on you in your most vulnerable moment, when society judges you for choices that weren't entirely your own, and how sometimes the family we choose becomes more real than the one we were born into. This young woman's journey from the dust of rejection to the warmth of acceptance will stay with you long after the final words are spoken. In a world that seems increasingly divided, this tale reminds us that compassion still exists in the most unlikely places, and that second chances often come from the most unexpected sources. Your support helps us share these powerful narratives with others who need to hear them. And when you're left with nothing but the clothes on your back and a life growing inside you, that's when you discover what true strength really means. This isn't just a story about abandonment. It's about the unexpected kindness of strangers, the healing power of honest work. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about judgment, forgiveness, and what it truly means to call somewhere home. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that remind us of the good that still exists in this world. Now let's begin this unforgettable journey. The old pickup truck's engine coughed one last time before falling silent, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through the sagebrush. Sarah Martinez pressed her face against the passenger window, watching the endless expanse of Wyoming highway stretch into nothingness. Miguel Martinez had driven for 3 hours without saying a word, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. "Papa, please, we can talk about this. I know you're angry, but—" He finally looked at her, and Sarah's heart shattered at the emptiness in his dark eyes. "I'm not angry, Mija. I'm ashamed. Ashamed that my daughter would bring this disgrace to our family name." The smell of motor oil and disappointment filled the cramped cab. Her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly, 6 months along, and showing enough that strangers had started staring. The nearest town had to be at least 20 miles away. "Papa, you can't be serious. There's nothing here." "This is far enough." Her father's voice cut through the silence like a blade. His voice cracked slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. "Your mother and I, we tried to raise you right. We took you to church every Sunday, taught you about respect and honor. And this is how you repay us?" Sarah turned to face him, searching for any trace of the man who used to read her bedtime stories, who had taught her to change a tire when she turned 16. Not here, not like this. She grabbed her small backpack from the floor, the only belongings she'd been allowed to take, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. For a moment, she thought he might change his mind, might remember that she was still his little girl. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress, and she placed both hands on her belly protectively. Sarah turned, shielding her eyes against the setting sun, and saw a battered ranch truck heading her way. Hope flickered in her chest like a candle flame in the wind. Instead, he put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the highway without looking back. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed across the empty landscape. Beautiful, but Sarah knew that beauty wouldn't keep her warm when darkness fell. She shouldered her backpack and started walking east toward what she hoped might be civilization. Sarah had known this conversation was coming ever since her mother found the pregnancy test hidden in her bedroom drawer 2 weeks ago. The shouting, the tears, the family meetings where she wasn't allowed to speak, it had all led to this moment. Angry? Her feet, swollen from the pregnancy, already ached in her worn sneakers. But she kept walking because the alternative was giving up, and Sarah Martinez had never been a quitter. The word disgrace hit her like a physical blow. "Get out," Miguel said quietly. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "You heard me. Get out of my truck." The September wind rushed in, carrying the scent of dust and dying grass. You made your choice when you decided to shame this family. Now I'm making mine. She looked around desperately. They were somewhere between Casper and nowhere, surrounded by nothing but rolling hills and the occasional oil derrick pumping in the distance. Miguel reached across her and pushed open the passenger door. "But the baby, your grandchild." "No grandchild of mine would be born in sin." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Through the windshield, she could see her father's shoulders shaking. Sarah stood there, watching the red taillights disappear into the heat shimmer, feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her 19 years. "It's okay, little one," she whispered into the wind. "We'll figure this out. We have to." The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Each step stirred up small clouds of dust that clung to her jeans and settled in her hair. That's when she heard it, the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle. Maybe, just maybe, someone would show her the kindness her own family had denied her. The truck that pulled over wasn't much to look at. A 1995 Ford with more rust than paint and a passenger door that didn't quite close right. But to Sarah, standing alone on that empty highway with the temperature dropping and her feet screaming in protest, it looked like salvation. Jack Coleman had the kind of face that spoke of decades under the Wyoming sun. Deep lines around his blue eyes, silver stubble covering a jaw that had been broken at least once, and hands that bore the permanent stains of honest work. "I'm fine." "That's quite a walk you've got ahead of you. Nearest town's about 18 miles. Just, walking." "But you don't have to." But then again, her mother had also taught her that family always stood by each other, and look how that had turned out. "I'm heading into town myself. I don't have any money to pay you. Could give you a ride if you'd like." In his experience, people didn't do things without reasons, and those reasons weren't always good ones. But Jack Coleman just stood there patiently, hands at his sides, giving her all the time she needed to decide. The baby chose that moment to kick again, a not-so-gentle reminder that her choices affected more than just herself. "I reckon everyone deserves a chance to get where they're going safely, and it's going to be dark soon." At 52, he moved with the careful economy of a man whose body had absorbed more than its share of hard knocks. "Watch the spring in the seat," he warned. "It's got a mind of its own." The driver who stepped out was equally weathered. It was warm and surprisingly clean, with a thermos nestled in a cup holder and a worn paperback novel on the dashboard. Jack had learned long ago that rushing into other people's business usually brought nothing but trouble. "You all right, miss?" His voice carried the slow drawl of someone who chose his words carefully. Instead, he started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. "You hungry, Sarah? There's a decent diner in town. Makes a good green chili cheeseburger." There was a note of something in his voice. Not quite sadness, but a resignation that spoke of dreams adjusted downward. But she'd learned that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was not dig into other people's pain. Some horses used to be bigger, but Jack shrugged. Times change, people change, you adapt or you go under. Instead, she asked, "What kind of ranch?" But to Sarah, exhausted and scared and more alone than she'd ever been, it looked like the most beautiful place on earth. Been in the family for 3 generations, just me now, though. Population 847 on a good day. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. There was something about Jack Coleman's presence, steady and undemanding, that made her feel safe in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Half the letters were burnt out, but warm yellow light spilled from the windows onto the sidewalk. "Best green chili this side of Santa Fe." Sometimes a person just needs a hot meal. Maybe it was just the kindness of a stranger and the promise of a hot meal. But for the first time since she'd seen those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, she allowed herself to believe that things might actually work out. Nothing wrong with accepting one when it's offered. Most people who ended up in Clearwater were either born there or passing through as quickly as possible. He couldn't remember the last time someone had called it perfect. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself. Jack looked past her down the empty highway, then back at her obvious pregnancy, her small backpack, and the way she favored her left foot. Her father had been too eager to get her out of the house to worry about packing her a lunch. "I told you I don't have any money." "I can make it," Sarah said, lifting her chin with a defiance that reminded Jack of his late wife Ellen when she'd set her mind to something impossible. "I'm sure you could," Jack replied diplomatically. Sarah hesitated. Her mother had drilled into her head from childhood. "Never accept rides from strangers." "Why would you help me?" she asked. Jack considered the question seriously. It was a fair one. There was something in his tone. Not pity exactly, but a quiet understanding that made Sarah's careful walls crack just a little. "Didn't ask for any." Sarah studied his face, looking for the hidden agenda that experience had taught her most men carried. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." Jack nodded and walked around to open the passenger door for her, wrestling with the handle for a moment before it gave way. The cab of the truck smelled like leather polish and coffee, with undertones of hay and something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Later she would learn it was the particular scent of horses in winter. "I'm Jack Coleman," he said as he climbed behind the wheel. "Sarah." She paused, then added, "Martinez." Jack filed away the slight hesitation in her voice, but didn't comment on it. Sarah's stomach growled audibly at the mention of food, and she realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "And I told you, I didn't ask for any." Jack kept his eyes on the road. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the setting sun painting the landscape in deep purples and golds. "You from around here?" Jack asked eventually. "Colorado. Pueblo." Sarah watched a red-tailed hawk circle overhead. "You?" "Born and raised about 10 miles from here. Got a ranch. Well, what's left of one anyway." Sarah wanted to ask about that, about the loneliness she heard beneath his words. Cattle, mostly. As they crested a hill, the lights of a small town appeared in the distance. Not much more than a main street with a few side roads branching off like the ribs of a skeleton. "Welcome to Clearwater," Jack said. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's perfect." Jack glanced at her sideways, noting the genuine warmth in her voice. "That's the diner there." He pointed to a building with a neon sign that read, "Mabel's Good Food, Good Company." As Jack pulled into the gravel parking lot, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. She had no way of knowing that this moment, sitting in a rusty truck outside a rundown diner in a town she'd never heard of, would change everything. Mabel's Diner was everything a small-town restaurant should be. Red vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a counter where local ranchers nursed coffee that could strip paint, and the kind of atmosphere where everybody knew everybody else's business. Mabel Hendricks was 73 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and had been feeding the people of Clearwater since before most of them were born. "Jack Coleman, you old hermit. Haven't seen you in town for 2 weeks." When Jack Coleman walked in with a pregnant stranger, every conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Well, I'll be damned," called out a voice from behind the counter. "Been busy with the herd," Jack replied, guiding Sarah to a booth near the back. He could feel the weight of curious stares following them across the room. "Mabel, I'd like you to meet Sarah Martinez. Sarah, this is Mabel. She makes the best pie in 3 counties. 4 counties, Mabel corrected, waddling over with 2 menus and a carafe of coffee. Clearwater's a small place. New faces are about as exciting as it gets around here." Her sharp eyes took in Sarah's condition, her dusty clothes, and the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow to fall. Around here, those two things often get confused. Jack met her eyes across the table. Question is, what do you think you are? Most of us get the chance to learn from them and move on. Some folks just need a little help with the moving on part. Never seen her before. Mexican girl. What's Jack thinking? Honey, you look like you could use some feeding up. The first spoonful warmed her from the inside out, and she realized just how hungry she'd been. I think I'm someone who made a mistake and is paying for it every day. My wife Ellen and I, we tried for years to have children. Went to specialists, tried every treatment the doctors could think of. Nothing worked. He paused, lost in memory. She gestured at her belly. Everything kind of fell apart after that. She always said God must have had other plans for us. Sarah's eyes brightened for the first time since she'd sat down. I loved it. Animals don't judge you the way people do. Said, maybe our purpose was to help other people's children when they needed it. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Jack leaned back in his seat, studying her face. I've got 12 horses on my ranch. Getting older, having trouble keeping up with all the work myself. Been thinking about hiring some help, but good people who know horses are hard to find around here. Sarah managed a weak smile. Are you offering me a job? She asked. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, lonesome and beautiful at the same time. Sarah thought about her father's angry words, about the shame in her mother's eyes, about all the doors that had been slammed in her face over the past few months. If you're willing to work, willing to learn, we might be able to help each other out. Something tells me you're going to fit in just fine. Jack's voice remained steady, but Sarah could see the pain that still lived behind his eyes. Sarah felt like she was balanced on the edge of a cliff, with her old life crumbling behind her and an uncertain future stretching ahead. Taking Jack's offer would mean trusting a man she'd known for less than 2 hours. It would mean starting over in a place where she didn't know a soul. Funny thing is, even at the end, she was more worried about me being alone than she was about dying. Made me promise I'd find ways to keep helping people, especially kids who needed a chance. Jack was telling me about your green chili cheeseburger. Apple with vanilla ice cream, but set in their ways and quick to judge anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of normal. Maybe because someone needs to. Maybe because Ellen would have liked you. Or maybe because everyone deserves a second chance, especially when they're brave enough to take it. Growing a baby is hungry work. Mabel poured coffee without asking, the gesture automatic after decades of practice. I don't have anywhere to go, no job, no money. The baby's father... She shook her head. He wanted nothing to do with us from the moment I told him. When was the last time someone had worried about what she should eat? That sounds perfect. She wasn't just a stranger in need. She was the answer to a promise he'd made to his dying wife. Though in your condition, you might want to go easy on the spice. Got a nice chicken and dumpling soup that'll stick to your ribs without setting your mouth on fire. Smart man. The motherly tone in Mabel's voice made Sarah's throat tighten unexpectedly. And pie, Mabel continued, already writing on her order pad. As Mabel bustled away, Sarah became aware of the conversations that had resumed around them, quieter now, but definitely about her. She caught fragments. Don't mind them, Jack said quietly, stirring sugar into his coffee. They think I'm trouble, Sarah said, not really asking. They think you're different. Sarah considered that while Mabel returned with a steaming bowl of soup that smelled like heaven. We all make mistakes, Jack said. There was something in his tone that made Sarah look up from her soup. Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching the steam rise from his coffee cup. What happened to her? Sarah asked gently. Cancer. 3 years ago. The weight of his words settled between them. Sarah understood now why Jack had stopped for her, why he'd brought her here without expecting anything in return. "I don't know what I'm going to do," Sarah admitted. "What did you do before? For work, I mean." "I was studying to be a veterinary technician. Had one more semester left when—" Jack's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know anything about horses?" "Some. We had neighbors with horses when I was growing up. I helped out sometimes. Basic care, grooming, feeding." "No, they don't." Sarah's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "I'm offering you a chance," Jack corrected. "There's a small apartment over the barn, nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. The diner seemed to fade away around them. It would also mean having a roof over her head and honest work to do while she figured out how to build a life for herself and her baby." "Why?" Jack glanced around the diner, at the faces of people he'd known his entire life, good people mostly. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. "I don't know anything about ranching." "You'll learn. Question is, are you willing to try?" Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Then she thought about the baby growing inside her, about the chance to start fresh in a place where her past didn't define her future. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm willing to try." Jack nodded as if he'd never doubted her answer. "Then welcome to Clearwater, Sarah Martinez." As Mabel appeared with a generous slice of apple pie, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, being abandoned in the dust had been the beginning of her story, not the end. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the doorway of the barn, watching the sunrise paint the Wyoming sky in shades of pink and gold. Her hand rested on her now prominent belly, 8.5 months along, and the baby seemed determined to remind her of its presence with every step she took. Behind her, the soft nickering of horses created a morning symphony that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. The way Jack left wildflowers on her kitchen table every Friday, the same flowers Ellen used to love. How he'd quietly installed handrails on the stairs to her apartment when her balance became uncertain. The evening conversations over coffee on the porch, where they'd talk about everything and nothing while watching the stars emerge over the endless prairie. He'd driven into town early to pick up supplies, and more importantly, to get the results of the ultrasound she'd had yesterday. Dr. Webb had promised to have the information ready first thing this morning. It had taken her months to get used to Jack's easy humor and gentle teasing, so different from the sharp criticism she'd grown up with. The transformation had been gradual but profound. What started as a desperate arrangement between strangers had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Inside were several ultrasound images and a note from Dr. Webb in her neat handwriting. "Healthy baby girl, due in approximately 2 weeks. Congratulations, Sarah. She's going to be beautiful. Ellen always said daughters were special, said they had a way of wrapping their daddies around their little fingers from the moment they took their first breath." Over the months, she'd noticed how he'd begun referring to himself in relation to the baby, not as an outsider, but as someone who would be part of her life. It was a development that both thrilled and terrified her. Mabel had become like the grandmother she'd never had, teaching her to make pie crust and sharing stories about raising children in a small town. Sarah had found herself attending services not out of obligation, but because she genuinely enjoyed the sense of community and belonging she'd never experienced before. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "You remember that first night at Mabel's when you asked me why I'd help someone I just met? What I didn't tell you was that I was talking about myself as much as you." He turned to face her fully. "After Ellen died, I pretty much gave up on everything. The ranch was falling apart. I barely left the house, except when absolutely necessary. I was just existing." She also wanted me to give you this. Dr. Patricia Webb, the town's only physician, had become both her doctor and her friend, providing prenatal care and endless reassurance about single motherhood. Sarah had thrown herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. How to properly feed. What are you saying, Jack? She had her mother's dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the prairie sky. Pastor Rodriguez officiated. Mabel made the cake, and half the town showed up to celebrate. Sarah wore Ellen's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers from the ranch, the same ones Jack had been leaving on her table every Friday. When Jack held her for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, even the nurses had to wipe their eyes. That girl had been scared and alone, convinced that her story was ending before it had really begun. And groom the horses, how to recognize signs of illness or injury, how to repair fence posts and mend tack. Real family, the kind you choose. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. I love you, Sarah Martinez. I just didn't realize it until tonight. And in a small church in a town called Clearwater, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way began the next chapter of a love story that proved sometimes the best families are the ones you never see coming. And Jack spun Sarah around one more time, whispering in her ear, Welcome home, Mrs. Coleman. I love you and I love that little girl you're carrying. And if you'll have us, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that some people are worth holding on to. Sarah's journey from abandonment to acceptance reminds us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to love us when we need it most. What did you think about Jack and Sarah's story? Have you ever experienced unexpected kindness from a stranger that changed your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your stories. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it touched your heart. Your support means everything and helps us continue sharing stories that celebrate the power of second chances and chosen family. What other stories would you like to see? Let me know in the comments. Watching you rebuild your life from nothing, seeing you refuse to give up no matter how hard things got, it made me want to be the man Ellen always believed I could be. Jack had been a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for asking questions or struggling with tasks that seemed second nature to him. The job, the apartment, taking care of me, all of it. And don't say it's just because of Ellen's memory or because you needed help with the horses. Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the pain of rejection, the fear of being alone, the gradual discovery that sometimes the people who matter most are the ones you never saw coming. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and exciting at the same time, built on respect and shared dreams rather than passion alone. I love you too. But it was the small moments that had truly changed everything. The people of Clearwater had been slower to accept her, but time and Sarah's genuine nature had worn down most of their resistance. Even the local church, led by Pastor Jim Rodriguez, a second-generation Mexican-American who understood something about being different in a mostly white community, had welcomed her with open arms. The sound of Jack's truck pulling into the yard broke through her morning reverie. "How's my favorite ranch hand feeling today?" Jack called out as he climbed down from the cab, his arms full of feed bags and medical supplies. "Like I swallowed a watermelon that won't stop doing somersaults," Sarah replied, unable to keep the smile out of her voice. "Well, Dr. Webb sends her regards and says everything looks perfect." Jack's eyes twinkled as he set down the supplies. He handed her a manila envelope, and Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. "A girl," Sarah whispered, studying the grainy black and white image that somehow clearly showed a tiny face in profile. "I'm having a daughter." Jack moved to stand beside her, looking over her shoulder at the pictures. The comment was casual, But something in Jack's tone made Sarah look up at him sharply. "Jack," she began carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Always am. Why are you really doing all this?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Sarah nodded. "I told you everyone deserves a second chance. And then? Then this stubborn, brave girl showed up who reminded me what it felt like to have purpose again." Sarah felt tears threatening, but these were the good kind, the kind that came when something broken inside you finally started to heal. "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about helping a stranger and started being about family." The words hung in the air between them like a prayer waiting to be answered. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Jack Coleman." And then, when he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, and then with growing confidence, Sarah felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. 3 weeks later, Eleanor Marie Coleman, named for Jack's late wife and the strength it took to start over, made her entrance into the world at Clearwater General Hospital. The wedding took place 6 months after that, in the small church where Sarah had found her community. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife in the church basement, surrounded by people who had become family, Sarah thought about the girl who had been abandoned on a dusty highway 2 years ago. She couldn't have imagined that being left behind would actually be the first step toward finding her way home. Elena gurgled happily from her grandmother Mabel's arms at the edge of the dance floor. "I've been home for a while now," Sarah replied. Outside, the Wyoming wind swept across the plains, carrying with it the promise of new seasons and endless possibilities. This story shows us that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest blessings.